In this video, I will show the Zenith 8S563, a console tube radio made in 1940. The radio has a large wooden case of walnut veneer with a speaker grill at the bottom. The panel of 6 buttons at the upper right is for AM station presets. They're tuned by adjusting coil slugs inside. The user could put stickers on the buttons for station call letters. At the upper left is the tone control, consisting of 6 controls labeled voice, normal, treble, alto, bass, and low bass. Each button, when out, boosts a particular frequency band. It provides a total of 64 different combinations of tone control. In the center is the black shutter dial in the style made famous by Zenith. The dial indicates the 3 bands, AM broadcast plus 2 shortwave bands. Shortwave bands cover 1.5 to 5.2 megahertz, indicated as police, and 5.2 to 18.3 megahertz. The black center knob is for power and volume control. The white middle knob is tuning. It has a heavy flywheel giving a nice feel. The metal outer ring is the band selector. Arrows behind shutters in the dial show which band is selected. As well as frequency and wave bands, the shortwave dial lists country names. This was common on radios of this era and was always more of a gimmick. The countries are representative of what you could hear, but the dial locations are not accurate. It lists police around 2.5 megahertz. This was true at one time, but is no longer accurate. Now let's listen to the AM band.
Still to come on 1310 News, a huge Blue Jays baseball game.
Extra, I like his Nikes. Look at his Nikes.
They're miniature. He's wearing the same shoes.
Now here's using the AM presets.
I'm talking to Frank about Roger's high-speed internet with new speed boost technology. Sorry, with speed boost I'm just not used to waiting anymore. I'll say, you even finish other people's sentences.
Now let's try the shortwave band.
Felt and their intervention.
Every side. Now, here's the one I want.
Looking at the rear, which has no cover, you can see the chassis at the top. The chassis had the identifier 8A02. Some other models use the same chassis but in a different cabinet. You can see the 10-inch electromagnetic speaker at the bottom. The chassis has 8 tubes consisting of 1232 or 7G7 RF amplifier, 6A8G converter, 6K7G IF amplifier, 6F5G first AF amplifier, 6P5G second AF amplifier, 6AC5G power amplifier, and 6X5G rectifier. The tube types include ST, with and without grid cap, GT type, and 1 Lochtel type. The IF frequency is 455 kHz. Schematics can be found in Bateman's, Ryder's, and the Zenith repair manuals. Slusser's price guide lists a value of $250 to $300. The same chassis was used in models 8S531, a table model, and 8S548, a chairside. There was an 8A03 chassis that was almost identical except for a phono input. Note that there's one quirk in the schematics which is typical of radios of this era but can be confusing. The suffix M indicates thousands, not millions. So for example, a 10 ohm resistor is 10,000 ohms, not 10 megohms. Power consumption is 65 watts and audio power output is 6 watts. At the bottom is an internal antenna Zenith called a wave magnet. It's basically a cardboard box containing coiled wire. It rotates to adjust for best reception. There's also connection for an external antenna. In my teens, I was given an old Zenith console radio. The case was rotten, having been stored in a barn for years, and had to be thrown out. I kept the chassis, which worked after a few simple repairs. That radio was my introduction to shortwave listening, and I spent many evenings listening to it. I remember many cold winter nights spent standing over the radio listening to shortwave stations around the world and being warmed by the glowing tubes. Years later, the chassis was damaged in a flooded basement and no longer worked. I was no longer actively interested in radios, and due to the lack of space, I gave it to a friend who collected old radios. Years later, when my interest in old radios had been rekindled, I started looking for a radio of the same model. I was able to identify that it was a Zenith Model 8S563 with an 8A02 chassis. I kept a lookout for this radio on eBay to see if one could be obtained at a reasonable cost, including shipping. In March 2005, a seller with an 8S563 contacted me, and we were able to agree on a price and arrange to have it shipped to me. It was shipped from Syracuse, New York, along with a spare chassis. There was some damage in shipping, but with the spare parts I was able to restore it without any problems. Restoration started with cleaning and inspection. All tubes tested good. I replaced any out-of-spec resistors and replaced all paper capacitors and electrolytic filter caps. The power line bypass capacitor was replaced with a Y2 type safety cap, and I replaced the line cord. The 6X5G rectifier tube is notorious for shorting and destroying the power transformer. I added a circuit breaker to protect it. I would have added a fuse, but I had a suitable breaker handy. All controls were cleaned with contact cleaner. The wave magnet was damaged in shipping. I carefully re-glued the many broken pieces until it looked presentable again. This is one of the models of chassis that used rubber wiring that's now become cracked and brittle with age. It's believed that they used inferior quality rubber due to wartime shortages. The insulation now falls off as soon as it is touched. Most of the wiring was replaced. I left a few pieces which I did not need to move or touch. I was careful to ensure the replacement wires were the same color as the originals. I tested all voltages against the values listed in the documentation. I adjusted the tuning presets. I performed an alignment as per the 10 steps in the documentation using a signal generator. The cabinet had some damage in shipping, mostly old joints coming apart. I re-glued them and touched up some scratches with wood stain before giving it a couple coats of wax. I ordered a replacement grill cloth from grillcloth.com and installed it. Finally, I ran the radio for several hours of burn-in testing. I find this radio has good performance on shortwave, even using the built-in wave magnet, which in itself is bigger than most radios. The large dial and heavy flywheel makes it quite easy to tune. The audio quality is excellent with good bass and treble performance. The radio is kept in a special place in my man cave.